Welcome to the Confidence Through Health podcast. My name is Jerry Snyder. As a health, wellness, and sports performance coach, my goal each week is to bring you experts to help you take control of your health and build your self-confidence. Thanks for including me today on your journey to better health. I want to say thank you to Social Media Cowboys for sponsoring this week's episode of the Confidence Through Health podcast. If you need help with a website, if you need social media needs for your business, if you need help with AdWords, SEO, all those things that you know you should be doing, but you are too busy to do, or you're too confused about, they are the experts that you need in your corner. If you're interested in launching a podcast, such as mine, they help me edit my podcast and do a fantastic job making sure that all of the technical side of it is handled, and we launch a nice, neat, edited podcast episode each week. So I want to thank Social Media Cowboys for their continued sponsorship of the Confidence Through Health podcast. You can find them at socialmediacowboys.com, or you can find them as well with other sponsors at confidencethroughhealth.com. Well, thank you, Tammy, for being a guest on the Confidence Through Health podcast.
Yes, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here today, Jerry.
Your story is something that I think a lot of people will resonate with, because we see people that we look at, we go, oh, they look healthy. They look fine. They're doing quote unquote the right things, right? And then all of a sudden you show up at the doctor's office and bam, you get hit with a diagnosis, and one that's not necessarily like just oh, hey, you've got something that's starting to creep up, right? Like you were hit with a pretty serious diagnosis, like straight out the gate.
Yeah.
So how did you handle that, like going from, hey, I think I'm healthy, to, oh my gosh, I've got to like completely shift gears with what I'm doing with my life?
Yeah. Would it be helpful for me to start with just a super brief 2-sentence
Sure.
summary of that journey that led me to the emergency room on December 12th?
Absolutely.
Okay. So, as you said, I was living a healthy life. I mean, really, and when I say that, I mean, I started a master's in nutrition. So I'd studied nutrition, thought a lot about the body, and raised by parents who fed me everything cut up fresh, green,
Mm-hmm.
from the farm as much as possible, organic. And that's the way I lived my life
Yeah.
and still do. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and really, I don't even think I'd had a fever until this journey with cancer. I hadn't had a
Yeah.
fever in like 20 years. I
Yeah.
just wasn't sick. And but I started noticing some things that seemed odd. Like I went to the gym all the time, worked out, but I was finding that I was out of breath when I walked up the stairs to work. And I thought
Mm-hmm.
that, okay, I'm not going to the gym enough.
Right.
I didn't give the right answer to the question, like what's
Yeah.
going on. Or I'd mow the lawn and I'd be like out of breath in just a minute and thinking, what's going on? This is weird. And then I started having trouble with my gut, and I'd always had this fabulous gut.
Mm-hmm.
And it started to like think I just felt more bloated. That's weird. And maybe I'm allergic to something. And
Right.
then I started to feel, and then so what led me to the emergency room on December 12th of this last year, 2023, was that I just got really bloated. I
Mm-hmm.
looked like I was 6 months pregnant, like that bloated.
Oh, wow.
And it really bloated.
Yeah.
And and I knew that wasn't normal, and I didn't have a fever, and there was nothing that it was like, clearly this is not an acute issue. This is something systemic. So it's a
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Yeah.
So I went to the emergency room, and it felt a couple times, it felt some severe pain, like for a few half an hour or something twice
Mm-hmm.
in my gut. Um, so I went in, my husband's there, they run a bunch of tests, MRI, blood tests, all kinds of things. And the doctor comes back, and I didn't pick up on this, but my husband said when she walked in, he could tell it was grave news by the
Mm-hmm.
expression of her face.
Yeah.
And she said, well, I'll start with the good news. And then he was even more worried. And she, said this and that,
Mm-hmm.
this is this, you don't have this, you don't have that. And then she said, but you have cancer,
Mm-hmm.
and it's spread into your organs. And I was absolutely, as you can imagine, absolutely shocked. And I felt at that moment something that almost seems not real, and
Yeah.
not the way it almost seems like an idiomatic and not a real experience. But I really felt all the blood rush out of my face.
Mm-hmm.
And my husband said he felt the same thing because the
Yeah.
shock was so great. And what added to that shock, Jerry, was that only 2 days before, my brother, with whom I was very, very close, had died of cancer, prostate
Oh,
cancer.
wow.
It came on incredibly suddenly,
Hmm.
and he was super healthy, like the same thing. So we're watching the
Right.
same movie played over again.
Yeah.
And so I took it in, and the shock wasn't as long. It was a lot longer for my husband, unfortunately. But for me, I was like, well, okay, here we are. We're going to figure this out. And
Yeah.
I just felt this peace about whatever happens is going to be good.
Yeah.
So that's miraculous.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know if that did that answer your question. I
Oh,
think that was
yeah.
preliminary of it.
No, yeah, yeah. And so like how long were you, and I don't want to say ignoring the symptoms, but like how long did you like start to have things before it was like December 12th?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, too long, obviously.
Right.
And a couple things, even backing up. So I went to, regular female checkups, and I've been doing that for years. And
Right.
every time I would come in, and they would say, "Oh, have this lump here that seems strange. Go get a mammogram." And I would go, and it was always like a cyst.
Right.
And so same thing happens. It's during COVID, and it's the whole mask thing and hard to get
Right.
appointments. And so
Yep.
I ignore it. I'm like, it's a cyst. It's been a cyst every time.
Yeah.
This is just what I do. But it wasn't a cyst,
Yeah.
clearly. So that's the first thing I ignored and say, don't do that. Even
Right.
if it's been a cyst 1,000 times, it may not be once. And then there
Yeah.
you go. And then the other thing is probably for about in probably June or July, I started
Mhm.
noticing I was out of breath.
Mhm.
Um, but again, I just chalked it up to I was going to the gym 5 days a week. Now I'm only 3 days a week.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly,
Right.
clearly that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and that's one of those things that for somebody that's leading a healthy life, right, and doing the correct things,
Yeah.
it's easy for us sometimes to ignore those little bitty things
Exactly. Yeah.
because it's like you said, it's like, oh, I'm not doing enough, or oh, it's just because I strayed off my normal diet a little bit, and it's like, oh,
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
feeling the results of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
But a lot of times, people that aren't doing that way, they don't even feel that difference between like
Mm,
what's normal, good,
so
and then
true.
like, hey, I'm off a little bit. A lot of times
Right.
they don't even feel that.
Right.
And
Because they haven't felt normal. They don't know what normal
right,
is. They don't know that baseline. Absolutely.
right. And so like when you're looking at someone,
Mm,
say that's out in the crowd, and you're just now that you've been through this, right? Like, and you're like, okay, people need to take these things a little bit more seriously.
mm,
At what point do you think is like, okay, well, if you go to the doctor and say, hey, the doctor says, oh, it's no big deal, right? It's a cyst,
mm,
right? Like, how do you know, like, is it a gut feeling that's like, oh, I should
mm,
listen to this,
mm,
or, press a little bit more and just say, you
mm.
know what, I want to get this one checked out a little bit.
Well, let me just say, just to clarify, the doctors never told me that the
Right,
tumor was a cyst. Yeah.
right,
So the doctors didn't fall short. I did.
right, right,
And I think that that's important to realize that often it's not the doctors who fall short. I mean,
right.
sometimes I don't think they ever try to fall short, but
Sure.
sometimes there's just the body's a mystery and we can't
Mhm.
actually see inside it.
Right.
And so there's so many things that we don't even know that nobody knows. It's hard to answer all those questions. I don't know if I don't know that it's a gut feeling, and maybe we shouldn't run with gut feelings.
Mhm.
But I would say certainly if we have a gut feeling, then go pursue that.
Right.
Um, but I do think it's a matter of really getting being on top of the nutrition, being on
Mhm.
top of the just all of the checkups.
Mhm.
And what I've also found in this journey that I didn't know before is that the role that blood work plays
Mhm.
in blood work has this ability, and I'm sure you're nodding your head, you know this,
Yeah.
but I didn't. Dr. Moma and Envita made it very clear to me that there are different ways, especially as we're working through a diagnosis like cancer, a way to determine how my body is responding.
Yeah.
And that's imaging and blood work.
Mhm.
And in my head, imaging seemed so much more reliable because it's a picture.
Right.
But blood work, he said, imaging is kind of is even the moment you get it, it's more outdated. And
Mhm.
blood work, especially maybe it's with all things, I know certainly it is with cancer. Blood work lets the doctors know exactly what's going on. When it's a really thorough blood work like Envita gives,
Right.
all
Right.
that blood work testing. it gives a very, very thorough picture of what is going on, and it's immediate. They can know the moment they drew that blood and the moment we test it, we can know something about what's going on in that body more than through imaging. So,
Right.
yeah,
Well, and not that imaging isn't like at the level technology wise is
yeah,
some of the blood tests and stuff, but
yes,
there are mistakes, there are shadows, there are things that you
yeah,
can. I think I saw that. Whereas in a blood test, it's like it's
yeah,
pretty usually it's pretty
yeah,
cut and dry. Like this is what it is. Boom.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and
yeah,
and granted, I mean, still it is like you said, it's all still a moment in time
mhm,
that was taken.
right.
Um, but there's a lot more that you can see in blood work. I think from what
Mhm,
I've been told, and
right.
I'm not a blood work
Yeah,
expert, but there's a lot
yeah,
more that you can see about what's
mhm,
happening over time through
yeah.
blood work than you can just from one picture.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So that would be certainly my advice, even, and a lot of the blood work isn't covered. The
Mhm.
extensive blood work that is helpful. So
Yeah.
I know my mother does a lot of those tests, and she knows that there's one place that puts that blood work test on discount
Oh
sometime in the
yeah.
and so she gets that
Yeah.
test every year at that time. So
Yeah.
she doesn't have to pay the full price because insurance
Right.
doesn't cover.
Right. Um, and so when you started like going through that process of finding out how extensive it was, right?
Mm,
And then like, okay, well, not that necessarily you missed things,
mm, mhm.
as far as like leading up to it, to let it grow that fast, because I would imagine once you get a diagnosis and it's all over the place, it's not like well, I know you're probably going back in your head going like, okay, when did it start?
Sure.
Right? All those
That's
things.
good.
But
Yeah.
but none of that really does any good as far as like looking forward, right? And so it's like
Right. Mm,
that diagnosis and looking forward and what the doctors initially said is like, here's the game plan.
mhm.
Was there something about that game plan that you were like, okay, I think I need more than this, or I
Yeah.
want to pursue other options besides just the standard?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, let me preface that with a couple thoughts. I think the only benefit, and there's probably a good to this, of thinking back,
Mhm.
maybe on anything that we do, is just as a way of understanding ourselves better, so that in
Mhm.
the future, those pitfalls don't become habit. Like this is obviously a habit that I have, and so
Right.
being aware of that habit that doesn't lead to my flourishing,
Yeah.
let's figure out a way to get it
Yeah.
out. Um,
Mhm.
but yes, and yes, there was when I was at the hospital. So after that initial diagnosis, I was in the hospital for a couple days, and then
Mhm.
went home for Christmas. I have two older children in their 20s. They came to both boys, and they came to visit.
Mhm.
So I had Christmas with them. The day that they left, I felt sick again. The bloating was still really bad. So I went back to the hospital for hoping to just I thought maybe there was fluid that we were just going to drain off, and they
Mhm.
said fluid. They thought at this time that there were just my gut was filled with tumors. I don't know, because we didn't have a PET scan, which is more accurate than
Yeah.
an MRI.
Yeah.
And or at least for that work that's being done. And they had me in the hospital for 8 days. And at that time, they decided that I just wasn't able to eliminate any food. And so I couldn't
Mhm.
take any food orally. So for about 2.5 months, I was hooked up to a feeding tube through
Oh
through
wow.
a catheter of this. My speaking about nutrition, and
Yeah.
that's where, Jerry, that's where you see so clearly how important food is,
Yeah.
because it's not just I just think all these aspects of, even just mentally, like all these aspects of myself became better the,
Mhm.
the moment I was able to start drinking like chicken broth and
Yeah.
into my system. So there's this clarity that you have between, when you're deprived of something
Mhm.
essential because of a necessity, and that you see more clearly how essential that original thing is.
Yeah.
But it was essential for me at this point to not take it, because they were worried that my small intestine had started to fold because of either the tumors pressing on it or just
Mhm.
fluid. It may have been a combination,
Mhm.
but that folding of the small intestine, they were concerned that it would actually burst,
Mhm.
and then I could die in minutes from
Yeah.
from.
Yeah.
So they put me on this feeding tube, and that saved my life.
Mhm.
And then I looked again, like at my brother's situation, and just thought, okay, he did everything right. He actually
Mhm.
went to all of his doctor's appointments. He never missed any. The reason they even caught the prostate cancer was because he asked them to test him early. They're like, you're too young and the tests
Yeah.
aren't that great. And he said, test me anyway,
Yeah.
because even though I feel great, I need to know. So he did the
Right.
opposite. He was better than I. And yet still, and he went through all, and he had the best medical care that
Right.
traditional medicine can offer, and he died.
Yeah.
Simply because and he went in completely healthy. And
Mhm.
because the way that traditional chemotherapy is given to individuals when you have to take it that aggressively when you're that sick,
Mhm.
the reason people die is because their immune system cannot handle that
Right.
level of toxicity. It's
Right.
systemic. And so I
Yeah.
knew that if I went that route, as good as my oncologists were in the hospital, and they even said, not exactly that, but they basically said, we're going to try this out. We're going to basically throw some chemo against the wall and hope it sticks. And
Right.
they say any more than that. They weren't being callous.
Mhm.
You know, that was just the truth of it. They were speaking honestly to me. So I knew I needed something else. And had a colleague who mentioned that there was naturopathic chemotherapy
Mhm.
in Scottsdale. And I said,
Yeah.
where has this been all my life?
Yeah.
So that's when I went to Envita.
Yeah. And so that, I mean, that sheds light on, I think, a couple of things as far as like the traditional medicine route, right? And I've heard that with other, friends, but in other communities as well about, that oftentimes when you're dealing with the aggressive, stage 3, stage 4, like either either you didn't catch it early enough or you caught it, but it just continued to progress with no
Yep.
matter what you threw at it.
Yep.
That a lot of times the doctors will tell you like the chemo is worse than the actual cancer at that point.
Yeah.
A lot of
Yeah.
times because of the level that they have to give to your body. And like you said, the toxicity amount, your
Yeah.
body just can't handle that in that short
Yeah.
time period.
I mean, what chemotherapy does is it kills fast growing cells.
Mhm.
It kills cells. And since cancers are fast growing cells, you want to kill them.
Right.
But it kills all fast growing cells. So
Right.
that's why hair falls out. That's why, no, but my hair is so short because it's starting to
Mhm.
grow back now. But that's why hair falls out because it's a
Yeah.
fast growing cell.
Yeah.
So if you think about all the fast growing cells in the body, that's a problem.
Right. And and it's probably why people age so quickly,
Mm,
right? Because like
yeah, yeah, yeah.
as far as in that moment of time that you're going through it, and a lot of times they bounce back.
Mhm.
Um, but so when you do you think that your viewpoint of going through that aggressive chemotherapy and what they were talking about doing was possibly different than, say, somebody who hadn't had their brother just pass away from the same thing, or this not the same thing, but cancer and the
Yeah,
same
yeah, yeah.
aggressiveness?
Almost the same thing. Yeah, just
Yeah,
the only difference is that where it was
where it was located. Yeah,
originated.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Perhaps
Mhm.
I always was one who sought out naturopathic remedies to things
Mhm.
beforehand because I believe the closer we can get to nature, the easier it is to, so if you have a headache and it's great to take aspirin and maybe
Mhm.
that's what you need, but if you can do white bark extract, then that
Right.
it's less stripped from its natural environment and so just easier on the body.
Yeah.
So I may have, but I just didn't know that such a thing existed. And
Mhm.
maybe I should have known that, but I didn't know there was such a thing because it just seemed like everybody I talk to, you get cancer, you die. That's just what
Right.
happens. And so the thought that that's not just what happens, that
Yeah.
there was, and I knew that there was a lot of new cutting edge research,
Mhm.
especially internationally, especially I think Germany is one of the more cutting edge, on
Mhm.
that cutting edge end of things for chemo, for cancer research.
Mhm.
And I knew that we spent, billions of dollars, especially with
Right.
breast cancer research.
Yeah.
So, and we had, like a month dedicated to it.
Right.
Here we are. So, yeah. But I don't know that I would have, if it hadn't been, but I think what it did was it highlighted the fact that it was essential. And
Mhm.
maybe that was necessary because insurance doesn't cover it because they
Right.
can't under insurance because insurance says you have to do this particular protocol in this particular situation and you can't do anything else. And as soon
Right.
as you do anything else, well, whatever that anything else is, it isn't covered. And so that
Right.
makes it, I mean, very
Yeah.
expensive.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, when I say very expensive, Envita is the clinic I went to,
Hmm.
Envita Medical in Scottsdale. And they are very expensive, but if I were to get that same amount of care in the traditional environment, it would have cost 3 times as much. So
Yeah.
they are expensive because we're paying for it out of pocket,
Right.
but they do everything they can to make it as affordable as possible.
Right. Well, and one of the things that I have a client that I'm helping with his health that he's actually a family physician, and we
Mm,
were talking yesterday about as I was helping him with his workout and everything. We were just talking about he's got a patient that he was just like I'm flabbergasted that they were able to move through the system as fast as they did
yeah,
because of who they are.
yeah,
Um, but he was like, yeah, because the hospital has agreed to do all these things, and insurance probably won't ever pay for it, but they didn't wait for approval. They were just like, no, because of who this person is, we're going to highlight fast, like push them through
right.
everything. Um, and he said what normally takes 3 to 4, maybe 6 weeks was
Yeah.
done in 7 days.
Wow.
Um, and it's one that highlights, okay, what the battle you're fighting
Yeah.
on that side of things,
Yeah.
right? You've already got a battle going on inside of you, and then you're fighting that battle on the other side of it. And and I would venture to guess that like sitting where you're sitting, if you think back to December, like
Mhm.
the amount of money you've spent to now, probably it doesn't really matter at all,
Yeah. Well, thank
right?
God I'm to a good man who said, it doesn't matter, Tammy, whatever it
Right.
costs. So yeah, it was around 250,000.
Yeah.
Uh, so that's a big chunk of change.
Oh yeah.
And the tragedy is that many people just simply they don't have the means.
Right.
My son started to GoFundMe, covered
Mhm.
a big chunk of it, and then other things, we pulled here and there.
Right.
So yeah. And just in light of, as we're speaking of contrasts,
Mhm.
the care that I received, you're right, it would have taken a long time. Now, I think from talking to people across the country who were, that I've met, and we've had conversations about medical care, traditional, and then this integrated that I
Mhm.
received. In my area here in Scottsdale, in Phoenix area, the hospitals are pretty good about getting
Mhm.
people right. But still, that's a problem across the
Yeah.
nation, it seems like. And with Envita, I called them on a Friday afternoon. It was
Mhm.
probably 3 o'clock when I got on the phone with somebody, and she said, Michelle said, "Let me look at the schedule." I just talked to her on the phone, and she
Mhm.
said, and then she sent me a text later on that day, and she said, "We'll get you in on Monday."
Yeah.
And so I know I mean, they closed their clinic at 4 o'clock. And
Right.
so the doctors are going home for the weekend. And I know that several of those doctors spent that weekend looking through all of my information
Mhm.
and shifting things around and switching their schedules to save my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's massive.
Yeah.
Um, and and not that other doctors wouldn't do the same thing.
But they can't.
Exactly. They're
Yeah.
a lot of times they're they've got their hands tied behind their back because of whether it's the system that they work in or the insurance
Yeah.
that's holding them back. And like I said, with this other lady that like my client, he flat out said the hospital may never get paid for this stuff.
Wow.
Like, but they're going to go ahead and do it because of, and I'm like, in it shouldn't be a situation where because of who you are, you're getting that treatment.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately it is the insurance companies that lead a lot of the battle.
Yeah.
And I know that Envita is doing some things to try and combat the insurance side of it, right?
Yes.
They're
Thank
trying
God.
to
Yeah.
put some things
Mhm.
out for both local there and for nationwide to try and help people.
Mhm.
Um, but it shouldn't be like, but like, so looking at like the flip side of it, now that you're past like a
Mhm.
lot of the treatment side and you're like, how would you say your life has changed in how you look at nutrition and exercise now versus like I imagine it's no longer like, oh, I'm just not exercising enough.
Yeah, certainly. Yes. Yes, that's true, right? Yes. So some of the changes I think goes back to not taking things for granted,
Hmm.
uh, and really seeing, again, like I said, nutrition. I'd always eaten well. And so I knew what healthy felt like. And then when I couldn't eat,
Yeah.
and I had to take this liquid stuff, this white liquid stuff in a bag. Thank
Mhm.
God for the white liquid stuff in a bag, but they're making it in a lab. What
Right.
does that mean?
Yeah.
Um, yeah. Oh. Um, and then reading like real things that come out of the ground, seeing that difference just highlighted for me even more the importance of eating well and how it, like I said, doesn't affect just, I don't gain weight or,
Right.
my muscles look better. All those things are great,
Sure.
but it does, it's so much greater than that. I mean,
Mhm.
just like a cut on my arm heals so much faster.
Mhm.
Um, Oh, a lot of things. I don't have I have a fever. Now I don't. I can control it. My
Right.
nose isn't running as much, allergies, all kinds of things. And
Yeah.
the same with exercise. Just like I said, I'd gone to the gym regularly, but there was a time, of course, when I couldn't go to the gym.
Right.
There's a tube hanging out of my stomach. Even if
Right.
I well, I couldn't, that wouldn't be safe.
Yeah.
So just realizing again how many things that affects, and
Mhm.
really, it's not just about I'm stronger. I fit better in my clothes. I'm not overweight. Those things are important. Those are
Sure.
good measures of health. But the work that's done through lifting weights, lifting
Mhm.
heavy things regularly, and what it does even emotionally, mentally, the clarity that, or many
Mhm.
times when I started to feel better, when I started going back to the gym, I was like, so many things again started to feel better. And
Yeah.
so many times when and this, I'm sure this happens to everybody, you forget it, but you don't feel well, you feel super tired. And then you go to the gym, you do that workout, wherever a gym at home, you go on the run, and you're
Yeah.
like, suddenly I feel fantastic.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, and of that do you equate to, like, okay, the body is doing things, and how much of it do you equate to, like, whether you call it spiritual or just the gratefulness, or like that connectedness that I know I experience when I exercise? Not maybe not every time, but a lot of times
Yeah.
I'll have those moments where it's like, oh, hey, now I'm so glad that I'm able to do this, or with, like, watch this view or whatever it is that I'm seeing when I'm
Yeah.
exercising.
I've thought about this question a lot, especially being sick.
Mhm.
And a friend from Envita, Scott, I think that he joined you
Mhm.
on his
Yeah.
podcast. Yeah, he said one time to several of us in the room, this journey, this fight with cancer is it's almost more mental than it is physical.
Yeah.
And I thought a lot about that and what this means. And I think in some ways we have this tendency, I think this is maybe a fault of, Descartes, some Cartesians to divide, if we can
Yeah.
blame the philosophers, why not?
Sure.
That we forget that our body and our mind are not separated.
Mhm.
So in other words, when something is going well in my body, that makes my head healthier.
Right.
It makes me mentally healthier. It
Mhm.
makes me think more clearly. And likewise, when something is going, on the other flip side, when something's going poorly in my body, it's not simply all in my head, but it is also
Right.
in my head.
Right.
There's no separation. And
Yeah.
so, and that's not just for cancer, that's for
Mhm.
everything that we do all the time.
Yeah.
So working out does a work on our physical body, but does a work in our entire body, which
Mhm.
includes, we have this, we have a soul, and we have a mind,
Mhm.
we have a spirit, we have a body, we have these things. We are embodied, but we're also, in this strange way, these rational
Right.
thinking um, creatures.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
there's no separation.
Right.
So, yeah.
No, I think that, yeah, that definitely makes sense. And it's one of those things where a lot of times I think we forget how much, like, they are connected, right? Because we want to be like, oh, it's like you said, it's all in my mind, or, whether it's we're dealing with depression or an illness, or, a battle, like we're fighting that chronic disease.
Right.
Um, and, oh, it's just, I'm never going to feel good. It's never gonna, and a lot of times that thinking process translates to the body,
Yeah.
and vice versa. when
Mhm.
you're having that down moment, like you said, a lot of times you're having those down moments, you go for a run, you go for an exercise, you go lift weights, you go for swim, whatever it is that your cup of tea is,
Mhm.
and you finish. And it doesn't necessarily get rid of the situation that made you feel the way you felt, but you'll feel better.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a huge thing that people need to remember.
Mhm. And we talk about it sometimes, like, oh, I'm going to take a run to clear my mind,
Hmm.
to clear my head. And so we recognize it on some level.
Yeah.
Uh, But, like even just, I learned, I don't know the exact amount, but there's a huge portion of um, of dopamine and some of these things that make us feel good. They're produced in our gut. So if
Right.
our gut's off, we're not going to feel good.
Right. Right. And so speaking of your gut,
Yeah.
because that was
Talk about
that
the
was
gut.
your first like true like, okay, wait a minute, now I have something that I've
Yeah.
got to deal with, right? Um, so at what point were you, like, are you still
Mm.
having that moment of like, is this am I watching my gut? Am I still like,
Mm. Yeah.
like, is it still something that you wake up and go like, oh, what's it look like?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I do.
Yeah.
And maybe I did a little bit before and it was like, oh, it looks good. Um,
Right.
but yes, and I thought a lot about how long, what is this? I'm a woman of great hope. I'm
Hmm.
always I'm hopeful. I think that's important.
Yeah.
And I also love to wonder about
Mhm.
things, nutrition, the body, science. It fascinates me. And that's
Yeah.
part of what I've actually, in this weird way, enjoyed about this journey. There are
Yeah.
many, many things for which I am so grateful that I had this journey. But it's back to my gut. It's still an issue because the gut biome is so delicate.
Hmm.
And like I said, up until I started, the cancer started to spread and affected my gut. And then
Hmm.
I couldn't eat for a long time. Before that, I had a beautiful gut biome. I really did. I
Yeah.
was proud of it.
Yeah.
And I know we can get it back. And the good news is, if any of you are out there with the same kind of like, it used to be good and now it's not, apparently it's much easier to get back what you originally had than it
Oh,
is to
good.
start from scratch.
Yeah.
So they're up again.
Yeah.
This is
That's
this is
good.
the rumor on the street.
Right.
But but yeah, I think about that a lot and what kind of things are looking at what nutrition do I now need to consider in a way that I hadn't before.
Hmm.
I'm being tested for SIBO, but I probably have that because I'm bloated all the time, and I was never
Right.
bloated before. So it doesn't seem like it's connected with the diet. So probably there are these little pockets of overgrowth of bacteria in my
Hmm.
small intestine that just needs some medicine
Right.
to get rid of it.
Right.
So it's something I definitely battle with. But again, I know that um, we can do a good job and with medicine and with knowledge
Hmm.
and nutrition and all of that to heal it. So
Yeah.
it'll just take time. It just takes time to heal. It took a long time to get sick, and so it's
Right.
going to take time to heal.
Right. Well, and that's like you both what Envita's doing with their chemotherapy and the targeted as opposed to just a full body,
Mhm.
they're targeting specifically where the cancer is
Yes.
in trying to get rid of those cells specifically versus just wiping as whatever's in the way. It's the same thing with what like you're now at a point where you're like, okay, well, I need to look at what specific thing is there and target and get rid of that and not just
Mhm.
and this is one of the things that I caution people with when they say like, oh, I'll just need to take more vitamin this or more vitamin that or increase my mineral intake. And I'm like,
Right.
well, unless unless you truly know where it's at or what the bacteria is, what like
Mhm.
not that, but buying, vitamin C off the shelf at the store is super expensive, but it's still, if it's a waste of money, it's a waste of money if you don't know where it's going.
Right. And some of those vitamins that are fat soluble, you got to be careful how much you
Hmm.
take in. So you can have a level of toxicity from
Right.
them. So
Right.
yeah, and sometimes the sources aren't the best. And so
Hmm.
all those things we have to consider.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And so looking at like you said, rebuilding your gut is something that can happen. And there's a lot of research going on with that right now, like across the
Yeah.
world, about
Mm.
how important that is, not just for our overall health, but for our immune system specifically, right? And then when you talk about the immune system, you talk about chronic diseases, you talk about all the different stuff that you get exposed to. Um, and in today's world, like we were talking about before we even started recording, you can look healthy, you can do all the healthy things, but if you're just exposed to something you don't even know about,
Right,
whether it's
right,
in your house or in your maybe your neighbor treats their yard with something and you just don't
right.
realize you're breathing a higher level of
Mhm.
toxicity. Um, there's so many things
Right.
that your body's exposed to that having
Mhm.
a strong immune system is really the biggest thing I think we should be focused on because
Right.
that's the front lines.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Along with that, one of the blood tests that I initially had, it was not one that is essential. I mean, it may be essential, but it wasn't a kind of a requirement
Mhm.
for Envita, but they recommended it. It was fascinating because it listed like every disease I'd ever had, some illnesses.
Oh wow.
I didn't even know. Like I didn't know I had, some form of mono. When did that happen? And not only that I had it, but at this point, it's no longer an issue. So they just
Mhm.
like from drawing vials of blood,
Yeah,
or you have these toxins in your body. I have, and I was expecting high metal things, and I don't
sure.
have any of that. Like on kind of the common things, I had some strange things like high levels of certain kinds of petroleums. I wasn't huffing
Oh
gas.
wow.
I have no idea where this came from. And you don't know where it comes from. And so,
Right.
but that could be something that's good knowledge to have,
Mhm.
because then going back to what do I eat? What vitamins do I take? How do I think about my health? The more we know about the nature of our body through these kind of really advanced blood tests,
Mhm.
the more we can start to really treat not just symptoms, but causes.
Right. And that's really where the root is, right? Is the cause. Like
Yeah.
if we can figure out what the cause is, and a lot of times, and I relate this to like a lot of people can understand because when their physical body hurts, right? They sprain an ankle or something, and it's like, okay, well, the cause was I stepped off the curb wrong, and
Yeah.
I sprained my ankle, but then like you don't realize necessarily that adjusts your hips and that like depending on how hard you land, like that could have gone all the way up the chain. And then,
Yeah.
6 months later, you could have neck problems just because you walked funny for 3 weeks while you were trying to get over your ankle sprain.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
the same type of thing happens in your body internally that you can't see and you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, you mentioned, may I ask you a question?
Sure.
Okay. Turn the tide here for a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned that there's some really cutting edge research on gut health.
Mhm.
Where do I find it? Do you have
Um,
recommendations? Or do I need to
so
listen
yeah, I mean,
later?
there's a lot of I mean, obviously the Cleveland Clinic's doing a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There's stuff from like you said, Germany and England's got some people doing some stuff. Um, that yeah, that it's trying to figure out.
Yeah.
Um, Zach Bush is another guy. I don't know if you've heard of him.
I
Um,
haven't.
okay, so he's another guy that's doing a lot of stuff. Um, and just trying to figure out like, okay, what what's number one, what's breaking down
Mhm.
the biome, right? Like what are the things that we're ingesting or exposing ourselves to that's breaking it down? That's one thing, but then obviously like, okay, well, once it's broken, how do we fix it? How do we heal it? How do we bring it back to life?
Right.
Um, and and there's a lot of stuff going on with stool transfers.
That's so
It's
wild.
just it's amazing. And
It
when I first
is.
heard about that, I was like, oh, I'm a healthy person. I could probably. And then the more I dug into it, I was like, because I mean, I know it sounds weird, but it's like, okay, well, if you're a healthy person and you have a good healthy gut microbiome, you should be a donor. Because I
Yeah.
mean, what are you gonna do with it anyway, right? You're just gonna flush it
Right.
down.
That's right.
And
Yeah.
and then I looked into it, and they were like less than 1% of people that think they're healthy actually qualify as having a healthy gut microbiome for the stool transfer
Which
piece of it.
good,
And I'm
thank
like,
God. Safe. Yeah, but
yeah,
still,
but wow,
1%,
like,
less than 1%.
yeah, less than 1% of people who think they're healthy, not just everybody in the population, right? That's the people who think they're
Right.
healthy that will submit an application to say, hey, I'll be a donor.
Mhm.
That's not even looking at the people that know that like, yeah, I'm not healthy. I know I'm not, and so I'm not even gonna pursue that.
Wow.
Um, but
Wow.
it's a really fascinating thing because it's relatively simple,
Mhm. It is
right?
fast. Yep.
but the way that the bacteria shift happens in the gut simply because of a little bit of introduction of new bacteria. Um, and it can it I've heard stories of it like people have flatulence that smells like the donors now, like
Yeah,
because their bacteria is different, and so it's creating different things. And it's like,
makes sense.
but they can clear up their immune system within like a matter of 3 to 6 months.
Wow. Yeah.
And so yeah, it's fascinating stuff. And I gravitate to things like that because they're less invasive, right? There's something that it's I don't want to say it's cheap because it's not cheap,
Hmm.
but it's cheaper than the other side of it, and finding out that you're sick and having to go through all the treatments and all of that, and looking
Hmm.
at it going, okay, well, how much am I willing to spend to save my life?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly.
So
Yeah, that's so interesting. Thank you for
sure.
indulging my question.
But yeah, it's like it's crazy, and I'll send you some links of some stuff that I've found, because it's
Mm.
the stuff that's being researched, and it's unfortunate too that a lot of that stuff is not being done through the traditional government systems and channels. So
Yeah,
a
it
lot of
is.
the money that's being used for that is not it's not going into that kind of research, and so it's privately funded research
Yeah.
that's happening.
Wow.
Um, so it's there's a few more hoops and
Yep.
things that they have to jump through to be able to
Mhm.
get stuff to market, to be able to get stuff to be able to come out, versus if it was simply done by the FDA or USDA or somebody who can more readily go through the red tape.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, which is similar to what you
Mhm.
experienced, right? Like you can go through the traditional, and it might be perfect for some people, and
Yeah,
given
exactly.
their situation, given their location, given all of that, right? But
Mhm.
for other people that need the additional,
Mhm.
or want to look at other options or in combination of, right?
Exactly.
There's nothing that
Yeah.
says that they can't work together.
No,
Um,
that's yes, and Envita does that. They seek that out. I mean, there's some, there's for probably a plethora of reasons,
mhm,
some good and some not. There's a lot of tension on the traditional
mhm,
Western side of among many of those, especially in the oncology world, against places that are doing this integrated. And I think a lot of it, those people that have um, pursued Western medicine as oncologists are really want to save lives,
mhm.
and they're wanting to help others. And so there's no ill motives on
Right.
their part to create this tension, but it's probably a combination. Perhaps there's some hubris,
Yeah.
and perhaps there's also ignorance.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes there's also a like you said, traditional, right? That word means that this is what we've done, this is the way we do it, this is what,
Right.
until a certain place says, from a research article or a magazine or whatever, that says, okay, here's our stamp of approval on it. And just because those things haven't happened doesn't mean that something else might
Mhm.
be the most beneficial for you.
Mhm. Yeah, and in the case of cancer research, I know Envita has had stamps of approval from
Mhm.
many really reputable
Yeah.
journals, and still, it's harder to, it's hard to, it's scary
Mhm.
to accept something that seems new
Mhm.
often, especially
Yeah.
when lives are at stake.
Right. Right. So one of the things that I'm just thinking about, because like when we're recording this, we're like 9 months, like
Hi.
9 or 10 months after have basically been in the ER going like, okay, what am I going to do? And the doctors are like, we're just going to throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks and see if it works, right? And I would imagine that somebody along the way, and especially initially, was probably like, you may need to get your things in order. You may need to look about like how much time you have left and things like that. And now you're sitting in front of me, and it's like,
Yeah.
like other than having short hair and being like, oh, I wonder if she had cancer. Like there's no indication of like looking at you, talking to you, that you've gone through anything.
Yeah.
Um, like how does that just like make you feel like,
Yeah.
I mean, like I don't want to say so much the strong word of like it's a miracle, but
Sure.
because there's people that were involved.
Exactly. Exactly. Right. Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to discount the miraculous, but in a certain sense, maybe when you cut yourself and then the body's able to heal a cut,
Mhm.
it's pretty miraculous.
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
of it.
Yeah.
But the miracle kind of rests on the truth that the body is created to heal itself.
Hmm.
So places like Envita and others have come alongside the body and really enable it to do what it's meant to do, which is the immune system is meant to recognize and eradicate cancer.
Right.
Um, and there's when it gets to a certain point, like in my case, the body just didn't see it.
Mhm.
So how does it make me feel? Yeah, that's what I was saying. Um, I'm grateful for not only for my life, because I believe that in the immortality of the soul, and so
Right.
I wasn't too worried about the life continuing and whatever that looks like.
Yeah.
Um, on beyond
Yeah.
this side of the veil. Um, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to to be alive, to see my children grow, to stand alongside my husband. I'm really grateful. Podcasts like this remind me of how far I've come.
Mhm.
Um, there's a book. It's called, and maybe you've heard of it. It's called Anti-Fragile, and it's
Mhm.
written by an economist. I can't remember his name now. I feel bad.
Yeah.
Um, I've only read a part of it, but is you're familiar with the idea of anti-fragility.
Mhm.
Basically, this idea when he's thinking about the economic world, but this carries true to
Mhm.
the individual human as well. When we go through times of great suffering, there's a one group of people who become weaker, and there's another, the anti-fragile, who becomes stronger through it. That
Yeah.
that that suffering makes us stronger. And when I was a little girl, I heard somebody say that wisdom is hard earned, and I
Mm.
didn't know what they meant because I hadn't suffered.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there's something really good, really, really good about suffering that leads us to this point where um, we have wisdom that we didn't have before. We can
Mhm.
see with clarity things we couldn't see before. We have hope. We know that we can survive, and so we feel strong. I think that that's my biggest word is that I feel grateful. I'm full of wonder. I've learned so much about the body that's fascinating that I never knew. I
Yeah.
know now what happens if I know what it feels like in my body if my hemoglobin drops below 7. First of all, I even know that that's bad. I didn't even know that
Right.
it's 12 or 15 or wherever it's supposed to be for a woman.
Yeah.
Somewhere in that range is like where it should be. But I could tell you exactly. I mean, if that
Yeah.
happens ever again, I'm like, oh, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
And that's just so cool.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, wonder, joy.
Yeah.
Um, I feel anti-fragile.
Yeah. Well, and like the piece of feeling the differences, we
Yeah.
touched on it a little bit earlier, but like now that you're like on this other side of I would say that probably the majority of treatments and all of that stuff, right? Most of that's
Yeah.
all behind you. Like, do you feel like is your body more sensitive to things, I should say? Like,
Yeah.
do
I
you
think,
notice that? And
yeah.
I would say that's probably not something that's any different from where you were before. It's just a matter of noticing that sensitivity.
Yeah. Where I can say, oh, what should I eat? And then before I would say, what should I eat based on the reason of nutrition? And I'm
Hmm.
always, asking that question too. But I'm also coupling with that with like, what does my body feel? And that sounds really maybe kind of
Hmm.
wrong. But what does my body feel like it really needs? Now we're going to run that by reason. I'm not just going
Sure.
to eat based on emotion or
Right.
something, or simply desire. But just I have more of an awareness, like I can feel that I actually need to have not have this green thing and maybe have this, this other thing,
Hmm.
something that's more green, all of it. So, and that
Yeah.
wasn't something I was quite as aware of. So,
Yeah. Well, it's fascinating you say that because I've said that to people before when they're like, how do what? Because people always ask me, what do I eat as a
mm,
as a health coach, nutrition and stuff, and I'm like, well, you can't necessarily eat what I eat,
mm,
like, and you can. It's probably gonna be healthier than what this. It's definitely gonna be healthier than the standard American diet,
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
like, is it exactly what you need based on your body and what your body's going through and what you're fighting internally and all of that? And because a lot of times people are like, oh, well, you know, why would you eat that? You know, whether it was like, okay, well, like, maybe I just had four bell peppers,
Yeah.
and they're like, why would you just eat four bell peppers? And I'm like, "Oh, it's what my body wanted,
Yeah. Exactly. Right.
it's like, it's not normal to sit down and just eat four bell peppers. Like, I know that, I realize that. But
Right.
sometimes it's like my body's telling me I'm craving that right now, so that's what I'm going to eat. And and then of course, you listen to that on the other side of it, right? Like, okay, well, what did it actually feel like 2 or 3 hours later? You got to pay attention to that too,
Exactly.
and be
Right.
like, okay,
Was I
was
listening
that
to my body properly?
was that really correct? Or you fall into the, okay, I was craving, the fried chicken sandwich from the fast food place at lunch, and then an hour
Yeah.
and a half later, I'm crashing and all this, and I'm like, okay, wait, that was an emotional thing, not an actual
Right.
what my body wanted.
Yeah, 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 that's right. We want reason to
Mhm.
rule our gut
Right.
and not simply desire. Yeah,
Yep. Yep.
absolutely.
Yep. So for the person out there that is not feeling well, whether
Yeah.
they have a diagnosis or not have a diagnosis, they're just like, things are off. I don't know what's going on. I'm just going through life, right? I'm just doing life. I'm just day by day. Um, what would you say to them as far as is like getting the motivation to actually go get checked out?
Yeah, that's good. Well, I think I would first ask them why they're hesitating.
Mm,
Because it could be several reasons. And then based on what that answer is, that would help me ask maybe further questions.
mhm,
And I could think of a couple reasons why. Maybe there are three that come, there are probably a lot more, but three main ones that come to mind. And first is fear.
mhm.
Um, if I go, what am I going to hear?
Right.
What's going to actually be wrong? And is, that's like no news is good news, which that isn't necessarily the case. Um, and and sometimes it's shame. Oh,
Mm,
if I go, maybe doctor's going to say, well, why didn't you?
mhm,
Why are you overweight? Why aren't you working out? And even if they don't say that, you're going to, in the back of your mind, you're going to like,
mhm.
for sure, they're thinking that.
Right.
Um, and then I think the other is, or maybe there's four, time. That was a big thing for me. Like, I'm
Mm,
feeling fine. Time. I'm going to
yeah.
sit in the lobby and wait for all these hours and I'm gonna drive there and they're
Yeah.
just going to go, looks good, Morrow.
Right.
So time and it was a lot less time going to the doctor than being sick. So that's
Mhm.
my answer to time. That's a pretty
Yeah.
easy one.
Yeah.
And then cost, and I think it goes back to what you were saying
Mhm.
earlier, you said several times, what is the cost of replacing upon life?
Right.
And say in theory that we don't put any price on it. So let's live out that philosophy that we're speaking.
Right.
Um, as far as fear, I it doesn't change.
Mhm.
I my mother would always said to me, there are two things you worry about, Tammy, things you can change and things you can't change.
Mhm.
And if you can change them, stop worrying and change them.
Right.
Stop
Yeah.
worrying and see
Yeah.
what and if you can't change them, worrying won't help.
Yeah.
So, that's the advice I would give as far as that. If you're worried, just it's not going to help. Either go
Mhm.
to the doctor and get answers, or but that's not that fear isn't going to help. And if it's insurmountable, then hold yourself accountable. Call a
Yeah.
friend, talk to a family member, and say, I know I need to go to the doctor, and I don't want to. And I have really good reasons not to. So I'm telling you right now, you got to talk me out of it. So use your best rhetoric on me and get me to the
Right.
doctor because
Right.
I don't want to die.
Yeah.
And find a really good friend who loves you deeply enough to not let you be foolish
Right.
in those.
Yeah. No, I think that's huge. Having that support person, you know, um, whether they're just getting you off the couch and into the doctor's office, or they're going with you to the
Yeah.
appointment to listen and hear.
Yeah.
Because, I would imagine, I've talked to other people that have, like, I would imagine that once you hear that word cancer, you hear that
Mhm.
diagnosis, like, your brain probably gets flooded with thoughts.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so listening to the rest of the conversation is probably like futile. It's like, come back in 2 hours, come back and tell me the rest of the stuff, right? But if you have somebody there who
Yeah.
can say, okay, they said this, here's the next few things they said. So then in a few hours, when the doctor doesn't have time to come back to visit with you, they can say,
Hmm.
no, 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 this is what they said,
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
I haven't lived through that. I have had the experience of having my lung collapse, and my wife was out of town when it happened, and I'm in the ER going, I don't want to die while she's not here.
Yeah.
And they were like, you're not gonna die. This is fine. But I was like, of
So
course, at the
fine.
moment, you're like,
Yeah.
well, I was fine
Breathe in.
yesterday when it was breathing. I'm not fine today.
Exactly.
So how do you
Right?
know?
Everything's
Right?
essential. Yeah.
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 Um,
Yeah, and
you
I
know.
would say, I had that just along with that, absolutely, I agree. And my husband went to some of the appointments with me, but he's a
Mhm.
teacher, and so fortunately, he was able to work. I was able to work full
Mhm.
time actually through all my chemotherapy treatments, by
Mhm.
the way, which was amazing.
Yeah.
But my sister-in-law came with me, and then another brother-in-law of mine is an OBGYN, and so he lives in Washington, but he offered so graciously to be on the phone with all those
Mm.
appointments.
Nice.
So he would just listen
Yeah.
and take down notes. And then he, as a doctor, his mother had gone through cancer, and he just
Mhm.
said, even though I'm a doctor, my dad's a doctor, my mother's been around that her whole life, it was important for us to all be there to listen to
Right.
those appointments because even his dad being a doctor, he was so close to it.
Mhm.
This is a wife suffering. Again, he fell into that, like, I can't hear it. So
Right.
have people who are close to you, and I have another dear friend who's a life coach like you are. So,
Mhm.
or sounds like that's part
Yeah.
of what you're is doing something very similar.
Yeah.
And she came to some of these appointments with me as well.
Yeah.
So having people who were very knowledgeable, and then that's essential.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Ask great questions that I wouldn't think to ask.
Yeah. Well, Tammy, I want to thank you for being a guest.
Thank you.
If somebody is out there and is like, okay, I feel a connection. I want to know more about, your journey, or just to follow along. Is there anywhere that they could connect with you?
Yes, absolutely. I'm glad you asked that. Please connect with me.
Yeah.
That's why I've stuck around.
Right.
I'm hoping for another 35 years at least.
Yeah.
But yes, so I'll give I do have Facebook, but I don't want to check it very
Right.
much.
Okay.
So let me give you should I just say I would love to share
Yeah.
my email. Let me just say
Sure.
that, and I don't know how else you put it in
Yeah, I
some
can
kind.
put a link in the bottom as well.
That'd be perfect. Okay. So it's my first name and then my maiden name. So it's Tammy, Tammy, Wasson, Wasson, then the number 3 at
Okay.
Gmail. Tammy
Perfect.
Wasson 3 at gmail.com.
Awesome.
And you can one of the things that I've done that might be encouraging for people to do, like I said, my son started this GoFundMe
Hmm.
uh, for me, and what we did there, just because so many people were so generously donating beyond our, like,
Hmm.
it brought me to tears many times. Um, but what we did was just put updates on there.
Hmm.
So some of those, and now my husband on his name is Derek Morrow, and his Facebook.
Hmm.
People can look there and see the updates there, and then on my last name now Morrow as
Hmm.
well. So Tammy Morrow, that GoFundMe has a lot of those updates that can really give, I think, some encouragement. You could see that
Yeah.
journey. You can see pictures of me, like, here's where I can't eat.
Right.
Uh,
Right.
here's where I am now.
Yeah.
So, and I gave a speech. I'd be happy to share this too. At Envita, they do a little bell ringing exercise when you
Hmm.
done with the treatment to celebrate that,
Yeah.
and they give a speech. And so I gave that speech, and I'd be happy to share that with anybody. It kind of outlines some of the on the more spiritual side of,
Hmm.
that hope that sustained me through, and some of the promises that I clung on to, some truths
Right.
that I spoke to myself that carried me through
Yeah.
some of those dark times. So I'm
Yeah.
happy to share that as well.
Awesome. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'll link everything on the bottom of the show notes so that people can find you and connect with you. And because like I said, like you wouldn't, looking at you, you wouldn't know that you went through all this.
No.
And you definitely, like you have a piece about you and an understanding. And I think it's essential for people. And it really is like in whatever part of life. It doesn't have to be a medical issue, it can be just anything in life, is finding people that are willing to give back and share their story so that you can learn from it. So when you come up against that obstacle, you're able
Mhm.
to overcome it or fall back on that, or even get back in touch and say, okay, wait a minute, like
Yeah.
how did you overcome these feelings? Or like you said, the fear and the shame and the all those
Yeah.
things that could creep up. Like how do you overcome that stuff?
Mhm.
And
Yes.
so yeah, I think it's part of the reason why you're still here, right? Is to be able to
Yeah.
share that with people.
Yeah. I'm glad I'm still here to share
So that's
what I
awesome.
want to be here for. Yeah.
Yep. Well,
Thank you
thank you
so
so much, Tammy. It's been great having you on.
much. It's been great being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for checking out the Confidence Through Health podcast. Please subscribe, post a review, share this episode with those you love who need a little extra help with their health journey. Visit allinhealthandwellness.com to learn more about the coaching programs that I provide. All episodes are produced by the Social Media Cowboys, your source for all online marketing needs. Go to socialmediacowboys.com for more information.